You're 1,000 feet below the surface. No communication with the outside world, no idea if World War III has already started, and somewhere in the darkness, a Soviet-attacked submarine is hunting you. One wrong move, one mechanical noise, one dropped wrench, and 140 men die in seconds. This was life aboard a Cold War ballistic missile submarine. But here's what most people don't understand. The real enemy wasn't the Soviets. It was the boat itself, the isolation, the psychological weight of carrying enough nuclear firepower to end civilization, and knowing you might have to use it. This is what it was really like to live hunted underwater for 90 days straight. Chapter 1. The Nuclear Heartbeat. The SAIT-G pressurized water reactor sitting in the aft section of an Ohio-class boomer generated 220 megawatts of thermal power. That's enough energy to power a small city, but you're using it to stay invisible. Here's how it worked. The reactor core used enriched uranium fuel rods. Nuclear fission heated pressurized water to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit without letting it boil. That superheated water circulated through a closed primary loop, completely sealed to prevent radiation leaks. The heat transferred to a secondary loop through steam generators. Clean water in the secondary system turned to steam, which drove massive turbines connected to reduction gears. Those gears spun the main shaft and propeller at precisely controlled speeds, 60,000 shaft horsepower. But power wasn't the goal. Silence was. Soviet hydrophones could detect a submarine from miles away if you made the wrong noise, so every system was engineered for stealth. The propeller blades were designed to minimize cavitation, those tiny bubbles that form and collapse, creating sound signatures that scream, "American submarine here." Reactor operators called nukes monitored temperatures, pressures, and neutron flux 24/7. Control rods made of boron absorb neutrons to regulate the reaction. Pull them out slightly, the reaction increases. Push them in, it slows down. One mistake and you could trigger a scram, an emergency reactor shutdown. In hostile waters, that meant going silent, dead in the water, vulnerable. So nukes trained obsessively. They knew every valve, every gauge, every backup system, because the reactor wasn't just propulsion, it was life support. It powered the oxygen generators that split seawater molecules into breathable air. It ran the CO2 scrubbers that kept you from suffocating on your own exhaled breath. It distilled fresh water from the ocean for drinking, cooking, and the 2-minute showers that kept 140 men from going insane. The reactor could run for 25 years without refueling. But the crew? They had 90 days before the psychological pressure cracked them. Chapter 2. The double crew system. Cold War boomers operated on a rotation system called blue and gold crews. 2 complete crews for 1 submarine. While the blue crew took the boat on patrol, the gold crew was home. Training, resting, spending time with families they couldn't tell anything about their work. Then they'd swap. The boat stayed at sea almost continuously. Maximum deterrence, maximum pressure. Patrols lasted 70 to 90 days depending on mission requirements and food supplies. Not fuel, the reactor could run indefinitely. Not mechanical endurance, these boats were built to stay submerged for months. Food. The limiting factor for nuclear deterrence was how many eggs and potatoes you could cram into storage spaces. But here's what made Cold War patrols different from modern ones. You had no idea what was happening in the world. Communication was one way only. The boat could receive extremely low-frequency radio signals by trailing a long antenna wire near the surface. But transmitting, that meant surfacing or going shallow, extending a mast and broadcasting your position to every Soviet listening post in the ocean. So you stayed silent. Command would send brief messages, familygrams limited to 40 words, operational updates, news summaries, but you never responded. You just listened and wondered. Is the Cold War still cold? Has deterrence failed? Are my wife and kids still alive? You wouldn't know until you surfaced 90 days later. That psychological isolation, knowing you carried 24 Trident missiles with multiple nuclear warheads each, enough to obliterate entire countries, but having no idea if you'd ever need to launch them, that was the real weight. Not the engineering, the uncertainty. Chapter 3. Living in a steel coffin. The crew berthing area was a maze of stacked bunks called racks. 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet of headspace, a curtain for privacy. That was your entire personal space for 3 months. Most sailors practiced hot racking, sharing bunks in rotating shifts. When you finished your 6-hour watch, you climbed into a rack still warm from the guy who just left for his shift. The boat operated on an 18-hour day, 6 hours on watch, 12 hours off. Your body never adjusted. You existed in a permanent state of jet lag, sleeping in fragments, waking to alarms, drills, or the sudden change in engine vibration that meant something was happening. The air smelled like a mixture of diesel, cooking oil, recycled sweat, and amine, the chemical used in CO2 scrubbers. After a few weeks, you stopped noticing your clothes absorbed it. Your skin absorbed it. You'd come home and your family would smell it on you for days. Meals were the only break in the monotony. The galley crew, working in a kitchen smaller than most people's bathrooms, prepared 4 meals a day for 140 men. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and mid-rats, midnight rations for the night watch. Fresh food lasted 2 weeks if you were lucky. Milk, eggs, vegetables, fruit. Gone by week 3. After that, everything came from cans and freezers packed into every available space. The cooks got creative. Chili mac, sloppy joes, anything that could stretch ingredients and keep morale from collapsing. But the real morale booster, ice cream. Every boomer had a soft-serve machine running 24/7. It wasn't a luxury, it was a psychological necessity. When you're carrying the weight of potential nuclear war, sometimes a chocolate vanilla swirl is the only thing keeping you sane. The crew ate in shifts in a mess area that seated maybe 24 people. Officers and enlisted ate the same food. No exceptions. Rank didn't matter when it came to meals, everyone suffered the same canned vegetables. Hygiene was a constant challenge. Fresh water was rationed despite the distillation system. Showers were timed. Water on, wet down, water off, soap up, water on, rinse. Done. 2 minutes total. You learned to be efficient. The toilets, called heads, used a complicated vacuum flush system. Get the procedure wrong and you could flood the entire compartment with sewage. New sailors learned that lesson exactly once. But the hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the boredom punctuated by terror. Chapter 4. The Hunt. Soviet attack submarines, fast, quiet, and deadly, prowled the same waters. Their mission was simple: find American boomers and track them. In a shooting war, they'd torpedo them before the missiles could launch. Your mission was equally simple: stay hidden. The sonar operators, called sonar techs, were the boat's ears. They sat in a darkened room wearing headphones, listening to the ocean. Every sound had a signature: biologics, whales, dolphins, shrimp, merchant ships with their distinctive propeller rhythms, warships with their active sonar pings, and enemy submarines. Soviet subs had their own acoustic signatures: the slight whine of their reactor coolant pumps, the specific frequency of their propeller blades. A good sonar tech could identify a Soviet boat by sound alone and estimate its range, bearing, and speed. When sonar detected a possible contact, the boat went into silent running. All non-essential equipment shut down. No cooking, no machinery maintenance, no unnecessary movement. You communicated in whispers or hand signals. Even the reactor coolant pumps were throttled back to minimum flow. The boat slowed to bare steerage way, just enough speed to maintain depth control. You drifted through the ocean like a ghost, listening, waiting, hoping the Soviet boat would pass without detecting you. Sometimes you'd play cat and mouse for hours. The Soviet sub would ping active sonar, sending out sound waves and listening for echoes. You'd hear the ping reverberate through the hull, a metallic sound that made your chest tighten. Did they hear us? Do they know we're here? The captain would order evasive maneuvers, slow turns, depth changes, anything to break the acoustic profile and slip away. Other times, you'd track them, following at a distance, gathering intelligence on their patrol patterns, their acoustic signatures, their capabilities. The information would be recorded and analysed when you returned to port, but you never forgot what was at stake. If deterrence failed, if the order came to launch, you had minutes to execute. The missile tubes ran vertically behind the sail. Each tube held a Trident missile with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MARVs. Each warhead could be programmed to hit a different city. The firing procedure required 2 officers with keys, authentication codes, and precise timing. The missiles would punch through the ocean's surface and arc into the sky, their solid fuel rockets igniting in a trail of fire visible for hundreds of miles, and you'd know, absolutely know, that civilization as you understood it was ending. That knowledge sat in the back of every sailor's mind, every watch, every meal, every moment of sleep. You were the last line of deterrence, the invisible threat that kept the Cold War cold. But the psychological cost was brutal. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. The Navy screened submariners harder than any other service branch. Psychological evaluations, stress tolerance tests, interviews with psychiatrists who probed for any sign of claustrophobia, anxiety disorders, or inability to handle isolation. Because underwater there's no escape. You can't step outside for fresh air, you can't see the horizon, you can't feel sunlight. Time becomes meaningless. Days blur into an endless cycle of watches, meals, sleep, and waiting. Some men adapted. They developed routines, reading the same book multiple times, writing letters they couldn't send, exercising in the tiny spaces between equipment. Small rituals that created structure in the chaos. Others struggled. You'd see it in their eyes. The 1,000-yard stare, the irritability, the withdrawal. Corpsmen, the boat's medical personnel, watched for signs: depression, anxiety, the early stages of psychological breakdown. The boat carried limited psychiatric medication. In extreme cases, a sailor might be sedated and confined to his rack until the patrol ended. But that was rare. Most men pushed through because they had no choice. The camaraderie helped. You depended on the guy next to you. Your life was in his hands and his life was in yours. That created bonds stronger than most people experience in a lifetime. You knew each other's habits, quirks, fears. You covered for each other during rough patches. But the isolation from the outside world was relentless. You'd receive family grams, 40-word messages that said everything and nothing. Kids are doing well in school, miss you, love you, come home safe. You'd read it 100 times, analysing every word, wondering what they weren't saying. Did something happen? Is everyone really okay? What if the world ended and this is the last message I'll ever get? The worst part was the silence. You couldn't respond, couldn't ask questions, couldn't reassure your family that you were alive. You just existed in this liminal space between the world you left and the world you'd return to, if you returned. And every day you drilled. Missile launch drills, fire drills, flooding drills, reactor casualty drills. The crew had to be ready for anything because mistakes underwater were fatal. A fire in a submerged submarine meant toxic smoke with nowhere to go. Flooding meant tons of seawater crushing through a failed seal. A reactor accident meant radiation exposure in an enclosed space. So you drilled until the procedures were muscle memory. Until you could execute them half asleep, which you often were. The goal was simple: keep the boat operational, keep the crew alive and maintain the deterrent. Everything else was secondary. Chapter 6. Surfacing. After 70 to 90 days, the patrol ended. The boat would transit to a designated area, verify it was clear of contacts, and begin the ascent. Slowly, carefully. Always listening for threats. When you finally broke the surface, the captain would open the hatch. Fresh air rushed in, cold, clean, carrying the smell of salt and freedom. Sailors would crowd the bridge, squinting in sunlight that felt alien after months of artificial lighting. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky was impossibly vast, colours seemed brighter, sounds sharper. Your senses, dulled by months in a steel tube, suddenly overwhelmed by the world. Some men cried, others just stood silently, breathing. You'd transit back to port, Kings Bay, Georgia, or Bangor, Washington, where the Gold Crew waited to take over. You'd brief them on the boat's status, any mechanical issues, anything unusual that happened during patrol. Then you'd go home. But home felt strange. Your family had lived 3 months without you. Your kids had grown. Your wife had handled everything alone. You'd missed birthdays, holidays, emergencies, and you couldn't tell them anything about where you'd been or what you'd done. How was your trip? Fine, routine. That was all you could say. The psychological readjustment took weeks. Some men struggled with crowds, noise, open spaces. Others couldn't sleep without the constant hum of machinery. The boat had become normal, and the world felt wrong. But you'd train, rest, reconnect with your family, and in a few months you'd do it all again, because someone had to. Someone had to sit in the darkness carrying the weight of nuclear deterrence, ready to end the world to prevent the world from ending. That was the Cold War submariner's burden. Not the engineering, though that was remarkable. Not the discomfort, though that was constant. The burden was knowing that your existence, your silent patrols in the deep ocean, was the thin line between civilization and annihilation. And you carried that weight for 90 days at a time in the cold, dark depths, being hunted by an enemy you hoped you'd never have to fight. That was the reality of Cold War submarine life. Silent, invisible, essential, and absolutely brutal. We're committed to releasing 2 videos a week. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more AnchorWatch.